Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of November of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. Today, the ultimatum that was issued by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, to Ukraine, to Zelensky personally, expires. So everybody is waiting for a reply from the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, whether he's going to accept the 28-point plan, probably its original version, or not. It's already the evening of the 27th of November of 2025, and we still haven't received anything from the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. Another important thing that this evening right now, while I'm making this video, the President of the Russian Federation is making his statements about Ukraine, about the future, about 28-point plan provided by the President of the United States of America. We will not discuss these statements right now because he is still continue saying a lot of things about Ukraine. We will discuss his statements tomorrow during the next video, but the statements telling the truth are very strong, very powerful, and it seems that Putin made a reply instead of Zelensky about the 28-point plan. And the most important idea of the statements of the President of the Russian Federation, that Russia will never start negotiations, will never start talks with the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, because he is not a legal President of Ukraine. But the Russians stated that if Ukraine remove their forces from the territory of Donbass, Russia will stop fighting. If they don't do this, Russia will do this with military means. So let's continue. And the most important thing is that the United States of America are trying to convince Zelensky to stop the war, to accept the reality. You are losing. At a meeting in Kyiv last week, U.S. Army Secretary Driscoll warned Kyiv of a likely defeat on the front. According to the sources from NBS News, he stated that the situation for Ukrainian troops is critical and that Russia is increasing the scale and pace of airstrikes, maintaining the capability to conduct combat operations indefinitely. So the situation for Ukraine is very difficult. The truth is very hard. This is a hard truth for Zelensky, but we see that the Ukrainian authorities, the Western authorities, are trying to ignore the reality on the ground. It seems that they know something that nobody knows, neither the President of the Russian Federation nor the President of the United States of America. Anyway, sooner or later we will see what exactly the Europeans and Zelensky are thinking about, but as of now the special military operation continues and the Russians continue their offensive operation. And for example, during the previous 24 hours, telling the truth, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. And it seems that the Russians launched few more offensive operations at the front lines and at the places where the Ukrainians didn't expect, or where the Ukrainians didn't have enough of forces to probably slow down or to stop the Russians. So let's start, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received huge changes in the area of the city of Huliaipole. So this is the situation by the end of the 27th of November. This is the situation by the end of the, let's start everything from the 23rd of November. So this is most likely a turning point in the battle for Huliaipole, when Ukrainians were completely defeated on the line between the settlements of Zatyshe, Zelenyy Gai, Chervone, and Marfopol. And right after the Ukrainians were defeated along this defense line, the Russians began advancing further and further in the western direction, and the Russians were taking more and more territories under their complete control. And this is the situation by the end of the 27th of November. You know that during the previous 24 hours, pro-Ukrainian sources published a very interesting article related to the situation in this area. And the pro-Ukrainian sources are saying that Ukrainians were trying to hold the lines for as long as possible in the area of Zelenyy Gai and Chervone, but at some point the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of the settlement of Zatyshe, and the Ukrainians from Zelenyy Gai and Chervone probably realized that they were about to be encircled by the Russians. And encirclement means lots of things during the special military operation. We saw lots of violence, and obviously there is a reason to be afraid of being encircled from the Ukrainian side and from the Russian side as well. So that is why, according to this article, the units of the 102nd Territory Defense Brigade or Battalion were forced and made a decision to fall back from this area without any order from, let's say, Ukrainian military commanders. So Ukrainians at some point decided to escape Zelenyy Gai and to quit the city of Chervone without any permission from Syrsky headquarters. So they left their positions. without showing any resistance to the armed force of the Russian Federation. And due to the fact that they left their positions, they managed to escape probably this cauldron, but the Ukrainians from the city of Huliaipole haven't managed to prepare the next defense layer with the purpose to slow down the Russians. Of course, the Russians use that advantageous situation and they continue advancing right behind the Ukrainian forces that were retreating. And as a result of this situation, the Russians, without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side, managed to enter the southeastern and the eastern parts of the city of Huliaipole. And currently the clashes are taking already in the city limits. Furthermore, starting on the 27th of November of 2025, the Russians began spreading information among different Telegram channels and different social networks, suggesting and proposing Ukrainians from the city of Huliaipole to surrender. The Russians are saying that the defense layer was broken by the Russians, that you will not be able to hold their positions, and most likely you will not be able even to survive during the battle for the city of Huliaipole. So that is why the Russians suggest Ukrainians to surrender or to run. So the Russians, it's very interesting very interesting position. The Russians are not suggesting only to surrender, they suggest to run if you don't want to surrender. You can do the same thing that the units of Zelený Gай and Chervone did several days ago. So more and more talks about the situation in this area, more and more evidences and proofs that most likely Russia will be able to capture the city of Huliaipole without probably any resistance from the Ukrainian side. And if you remember, we discussed the situation about the city of Zaporozhye during the previous 2 days, that if Russians take under complete the wall of Zaporozhye, then most likely Ukrainians within the next 5 months will not be able to hold the city of Zaporozhye under their control, and Ukrainians would be forced to fall back. So the president of the Russian Federation, the Secretary of Army of the United States of America, Driscoll, are trying to tell Zelensky that Donbass is not such a big loss for Ukraine, because within the next 5 months, Ukraine may lose bigger territories, much bigger territories in comparison with the just Donetsk region. We can start talking about Zaporozhye, Donetsk region, Kherson region, and of course the Kharkiv region. All these territories could fall in Russia's hands in coming 5-6 months if Zelensky doesn't accept the proposal today. But he still hasn't accepted this, and this is the main point. Another important thing is that the Russians began testing Ukrainian defense along the Zaporozhye wall. Currently, the clashes are already taking place around the settlement of Dobropolye, Varvarovka. The Russians, as you can see, are advancing in this direction as well. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly. This information, as you can see, was confirmed by pro-Russian sources and by neutral mappers. Furthermore, the Russians continue improving their positions on the line between the settlements of Pokrovsk and Velika Mikhailovka. Additional changes on the ground were recorded in this area as well. So as we can see, the Russians are about to begin offensive operation towards the village by the name of Kolymytsy. This is a small village on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, which most likely the Russians will be able to capture without any resistance or without huge resistance from the Ukrainian side. And this is going to be a first village on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, on this part of the front line, of the Dnipropetrovsk front line. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours or even 48 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates from this territory. First, let's compare the map between the dates. So this is the situation by the end of the 26th of November of 2025, and if you remember, according to different sources, mainly pro-Russian sources, we adjusted the territory in this region back in Ukrainian favor. We are talking about the territory between the city of Pokrovsk and the settlement of Kotlina, so these fields were recolored under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, we recolored the most northern part of the city of Pokrovsk under control of the armed forces of Ukraine as well, and we made some changes in the area along TO 515 road. Some territories were colored back under control of Ukraine, and some territories were marked as a gray zone. But today, more precisely during the previous 24 hours, we got additional changes, but this time we got changes back in Russian favor, and this time with geolocations and videos. For example, pro-Russian sources published this video where we can see how Russians were advancing in the fields between the settlements of Pokrovsk and Kotlina. We can see how the armed forces of the Russian Federation were advancing, trying to capture additional 2 lines in this direction. And based on this video, we adjusted the map. So this is the situation by the end of the 26th, and this is the situation by the end of the 27th. Furthermore, we received a very important video from the settlement of Grishina. So in this video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of the southeastern part of the settlement of Grishina. So this video confirms that Russians most likely have strong control over this spot. Based on this video and based on the reports that were published by different pro-Russian sources and neutral mappers, we adjusted the map by coloring this corridor under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, it seems that Russians continue advancing and most likely they will continue offensive operation on the territory of Grishina. So this is a very important video that was published during the previous 24 hours. So we haven't seen this cluster bomb for a very long period of time. As you can see in this video, we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine along the central street in the territory of the city of Grishina with cluster bombs RBK 500. So once again, this is the moment when the Russians attacked positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, which means this is a cluster munition, which means that Russians most likely will continue advancing in this direction with the purpose to establish complete control and to improve their positions in the southeastern and the southern parts of the settlement of Grishina. So the Russians are trying to get the Olympiyskaya street, let's say, from behind. This will allow the Russians to cut the logistic in these fields and to cut any possibilities for the armed forces of Ukraine for the evacuation. Another important adjustment is coming from the road TO515. If you remember, just yesterday we colored this territory as a gray zone because several pro-Russian sources stated that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over these territories. But today we got this video published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking and FPV droning positions and soldiers of the armed forces of the Russian Federation across TO515 road right exactly in the area of the Zaporozhskaya street. So all these episodes during this video took place exactly in this area. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that most likely this is not a gray zone. Most likely there are positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and now the Russians are trying just to make these positions stronger and better. At the same time, the Russians continued their offensive operation in the city of Mirnograd. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions in the most southern part of the cauldron. Russians finished the battle for the southern part of the city of Mirnograd, and Russians captured several strongholds along the railways in the direction of the city itself. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions in the area of the Centralnaya mine. So this is the most important part. This is the final and the last important part of the city of Mirnograd. This is the last citadel of the city of Mirnograd. This is the industrial zone with mine, with terracon, with elevation, with a strategical position. So which means that the Russians, as you can see, according to different mappers during the previous 24 hours, managed to shorten the distance to this position to the minimal level. Currently, the distance between possible positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the mine is less than 200 meters. But another important thing that I would like to point to attention is the video that was published yesterday. Here we can see how Ukrainians were fighting with Russians to the south of this industrial zone and how Ukrainians managed to capture Russian soldiers right exactly at this point. And this video confirms that most likely this mine and this industrial zone is not under complete and strong control of the armed forces of Ukraine. We believe that there are very heavy clashes on the territory of this facility. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dobropolye direction. During the previous 24 hours or 48 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. I would like to remind you that Ukrainians started a counter-offensive operation in this area somewhere on the 16th of August 12, from 12th to 16th of August of 2025. It took Ukrainians August, September, October, almost 3 months to realize and to understand that they have no chances to unblock the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the city of Mirnograd. If you remember, 5 months ago, I told you that the general battle of 2025 will take place exactly in this area. And now it's becoming clear that most likely the armed forces of Ukraine lost the general battle for the Donbas. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, mainly according to neutral mappers, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians recaptured the eastern part of Dorozhny. The Russians answered the settlement of Ivanovka from the east. The Russians improved their positions along supply line between the villages of Shakhova and Novoshakhovo. And the most important is that Russians approached the settlement of Sofiivka from the south and from the east. The battle for the village most likely is going to start in coming days. And if Ukraine loses control over the settlement, Russians will answer the Donbas operational space, and from this red line, Russians will be able to advance in any direction. They will be able to advance in the northern direction, they will be able to advance in the direction of Dobropolye, and Russians will be able to advance in the direction of Drushkovka with the purpose to encircle Ukrainians on the territory of the Konstantinovka agglomeration. As for the city of Konstantinovka, the most important updates are coming from the Kliban-Bytsky foothold. The pro-Russian sources and neutral mappers stated that Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to capture this stronghold. So this is another stronghold on the way towards the settlements of Berestok and Stepanovka. There is another stronghold right in front of the Russians, this one, on this intersection of roads. And when Russians capture this stronghold along N20 road, then Russians will be able to begin offensive in the direction of Stepanovka from behind, and Russians will be able to begin offensive towards the settlement of Berestok or towards the southwestern part of the Konstantinovka agglomeration. So it seems that the front line in this area has collapsed as well, and Russians managed to break this territory. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Slaviansk direction. You know that this territory, this direction, this front line, we used to call as the Siversk direction or the Liman direction, but I believe that starting on the 27th of November, it's more correct to call this territory as the Slaviansk direction. Before we start, first of all, I would like to point your attention to this number of icons. So just take a look at these icons. Every single icon means an FPV drone attack on this or that position equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine. And just in front of your screens, we can count probably up to several dozens of these strikes. And if we compare this front line with every single one, with any other one, you may see that this direction has the biggest concentration of attacks, which means that Russians launch something huge. The Russians, first of all, established complete kill zone over the triangle of the territories between Siversk, Slaviansk, and Liman. So this is already a kill zone, the biggest kill zone across and through the entire special military operation. Nothing that enters this territory can get the destination point. Russians will destroy everything, and we can see this during these videos. For example, in this video, we can see how Russians were destroying equipment, different positions, and forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. Here we can see several vehicles and positions that were destroyed by Russians. Here we can see FPV drone attack on the vehicle of the armed forces of Ukraine that was moving from the city of Slaviansk towards the city of Liman. The vehicle was destroyed as a result of FPV drone attack carried out by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So many strikes, lots of attacks. Most of them are taking place along the main supply lines, which means that this is the end for the Ukrainian logistic. And as a result of offensive operation and due to the situation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Vasiukivka. So this is the end of the 26th of November of 2025, and this is the map by the end of the 27th of November. The Russians, as you can see, improved their position significantly. Furthermore, I would like to point your attention and to remind you that the last week the Russians reported that they captured Pazena. This week they captured the settlement of Vasiukivka. Now it's clear and becoming clear that the Russians will try to advance further along MO3 road with the purpose to establish complete control over the territories to the south of the settlement of Rai Alexandrovka. The village of Rai Alexandrovka is the Slaviansk stronghold. So the defense of the city of Slaviansk and probably the logistic of the city of Siversk completely relies just on this settlement. If Ukraine loses control over the settlement of Rai Alexandrovka, I believe that we can start counting days before the fall of the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk itself. Furthermore, the Russians, according to information we have, improved their position significantly to the east of the city of Liman. So these are the changes on this front line between the dates, according to pro-Russian sources. So the Russians are improving their positions, and the Russians are improving the semi-encirclement of the city of Liman from the southeast, from the east, and from the east. So the Russians will continue offensive until they encircle the city of Liman from every single side, and then the clashes for the territory begins. So the situation in this area is a very difficult situation for the armed forces of Ukraine without any chances to be improved. Now let's move further and let's talk about the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. The most important and interesting updates are coming from the Volchansk direction. By the way, the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, during the evening, his evening statements stated that Russia managed to capture the city of Volchansk completely. As of the changes, there are still positions and there are still some territories under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This is the situation by the end of the 26th of November, and this is the situation by the end of the 27th of November. And according to these changes, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the southern part of Volchansk. This information was provided by neutral mappers, and the Russians answered the settlement of Vilcha, and this is the most important. And today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Group of Forces North also confirmed that the Russians answered the city of Liman in this area and the settlement of Vilcha. So furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the settlement of Vilcha, and telling the truth, I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. Most likely the Russians will be able to pass through the settlement of Vilcha, answer the Kharkiv operational space, and then the Bily Kolodys offensive operation will begin. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.